Greetings, fellow Earthlings. On YouTube, under the actual video, you'll see a video title. Then you'll see so many views, you'll see a date, and you'll see an ellipsis with the word more. If you click on that, the description box in its entirety will open up. In other words, if there's anything in the box, it'll open up. So always click on that when you watch my videos, because I try to share as much information as possible. I try to tell you everything I know to help with your study of the accordion, okay? Now, here's my home page, and one of the tabs says Community. If you click that tab, you'll see a graphic, and it's my amplified circle of fifths. And if you right-click it and choose Copy Image or Save Image As, you can put that image on your computer and look at it or print it out. It's really handy to be able to print it out because you can write on it and make copies and have all kinds of fun, okay? Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to continue my discussion of the diminished seventh chord because I couldn't get it all in one video. Now, the Stradella bass configuration, okay? Now, here's your diminished rank on that configuration. The Stradella bass setup works very, very well with my invention, the amplified circle of fifths. All right, you've seen that many times. And it works very, very well with it. There's a strong correlation between the Stradella bass machine and the amplified circle of fifths. And the two really important key points are, the two really important correlations are the bass and counter bass ranks, okay, and the diminished rank. Those are strongly correlated with my system because my system is actually like your bass rank on the accordion. It's a circle of fifths. And then your counter major ring on the amplified circle of fifths correlates with the counter bass rank on the accordion. And the fact that I have this design such that you have all diminished sevenths chords all around the circle correlates well with the fact that you have an entire rank of diminished buttons. Okay? Now that's hard to see. The tones are printed in there, but it's very hard to see. So I'll explain them to you verbally. Okay? Now, we talked about that diminished rank on the accordion, and we discovered that for each root or each bass tone or counter bass tone, okay, there are 4 primary diminished buttons. We already talked about that. So for the C bass or root, you'll have 4 primary diminished buttons. All right, we discussed that in detail, and we discovered that when you combine that C bass with each of the primary diminished buttons, you get a certain kind of chord. I talked about that, so we don't need to spend too much time. I hope you understand that. Then we discovered that if indeed there are 4 primary diminished buttons for each root, then you can play counter bass buttons with those 4 primary buttons. And I have different colors here. You can play this counter bass with this diminished button, and this with this, and so forth. Okay, I talked about that. And you discovered that those combinations, each of them, yields a complete diminished 7 chord. For example, any one of these combinations will give you these tones. These are the tones that you'll get. And each one creates a complete diminished 7th chord. Okay, hope I'm speaking correctly. Okay, we did that. Then I reviewed how I invented this and designed this such that it's based on the minor third interval. And I showed you the diminished chord structure. I showed you the diminished 7th structure. Okay, you can review that if you're getting confused or getting lost. Okay, we already talked about that. Now, I'm bringing you up to speed because what if you're a beginner or you kind of don't get it, or you don't have this handy Stradella chart, which I've used all my life. If you don't have the handy Stradella chart, or you have a chart that doesn't actually have the tones printed, okay, and you don't know what the tones are in each button, then you can use my, hold on, I have a pile of preparation here. You can use the handy amplified circle of fifths chart, okay? If you don't have the Stradella chart, you can still use mine. So you say, let's look at a basic situation. You say, what tones are sounded when using a given diminished button? In other words, when you pick any diminished button here, you say, I don't have this chart, but what tones come out of that button? So the question is then, what tones are sounded when using a given diminished button, any button? And the way to find out is you locate the diminished button's name in the amplified circle of fifths major data ring. You see, you locate the diminished button's name in the amplified circle of fifths major data ring. So I cleaned this up to show you just one slice, okay? And here's your amplified circle of fifth. All right, I isolated this slice, and here is your major data ring, okay? Your major data ring. Now remember, this moves in fifths like this in this direction. So you see, we located our example tone G flat. We say, well, what tones come out of that G flat diminished button? So we locate it on our major data ring on our amplified circle of fifths, and we see there's your G flat tone, okay? Now we see then that your G flat, okay, that your G flat represents that diminished button on your Stradella bass, okay? We found it on our amplified circle of fifths. And we also see that the tones here on each side of that G flat, okay, they form the E flat diminished chord. So that E flat represents the name of the featured diminished chord on that button. Okay, so what I'm saying is you're pressing the G flat diminished button, but you are getting an E flat diminished chord. And you see the leftover C in your slice here, okay, with a different color? That C tells you that when you add that C bass, okay, to your E flat diminished chord, you'll get a full diminished seventh chord. And here are the tones. We kind of talked about that before, but I'm showing you how to find the tones in a button when you don't have the Stradella chart. You found your G flat name, okay, the letter in your major data ring, right? You found your chords that make up a diminished chord, and you see here that with this bass tone and these tones, which actually make an E flat diminished chord, you'll get a complete diminished chord. You kind of should understand that now because I've given you the basics, but that's a beautiful thing. How to find the tones in a button if you don't have the Stradella chart. Now, you see here, it's beautiful that the circle of fifths, the fifths move in this direction. So you see on your amplified circle of fifths that the direction of your tones is moving clockwise, okay? Well, on your accordion, on the buttons, you also see that here's our sample G flat, that the fifths move in this direction, left to right. Like when you read in English, okay, we read left to right in English. So your tones go this way, right? And on your circle of fifths, they go this way. So you say, well, if I want to know what are the tones in the, let's say the A flat diminished button, then you move up this way on your amplified circle of fifths, and you find that A flat, and you get the same thing. You'll immediately find the tones that you need. Now, another basic question is, if you don't have the Stradella chart, you say, what tones are sounded when using a given file's diminished button? You say, okay, you say, I'm talking about a specific file, okay, a specific file. I'm not talking about these specific ranks, the buttons in the rank. I'm talking about one file. So when you're focusing on one file, you say, what tones are sounded when using a given file's diminished button? And let's say C, all right? The C file, where C is your bass, it's your root. Well, to find it, you locate, all right? You locate the file's bass tone name in the amplified circle of fifths minor data ring, okay? So we take the amplified circle of fifths and we find that C tone, that's our root, right? And we want to know what tones are produced by that C diminished button. Well, here's our file, our C file represented here, and you see that on each side of your root, you're given a tone, and that gives you your A diminished chord. In other words, the A represents the name of the featured diminished chords. In other words, when you press the C diminished button, you are actually getting an A diminished chord. Now, it's a C file, okay? So you say, well, when I press that diminished button, shouldn't I be getting a C diminished 7? No, the fifth is missing. And you say, well, I don't know what tone is missing. I don't have the Stradella chart. Well, the amplified circle of fifths tells you right here. It gives you your A diminished chord, right, which is sounded when you press the C diminished button, all right? And the tone that's missing in that button is shown clearly on your amplified circle of fifths. See, it's shown clearly. That's a beautiful thing. This is a great thing here. In other words, the G flat, all right, here represents the missing tone in the button. It's the missing tone in your C diminished 7. It represents it. It's right in that same slice. The amplified circle of fifths provides so much information that a while back when I started doing this, I said there's so much information for me to impart that it could take forever, and it's still taking forever. Now, here's another beautiful thing. I'm going as fast as I can. You say, in this series of videos, the diminished 7th chord, we talked about the diminished 7th chord, okay, ad nauseum, all right? So you see here the C diminished 7th chord. And what it is basically is your C root or bass, all right, with your E flat diminished chord. You see here, E flat diminished chord, all right, that gives you the full C diminished 7. Now you see that? You see bass plus your E flat diminished chord. Now up here, across from this C file, okay, this C slice, all right, across from there, you see another C, all right? And the C over here is in the diminished data ring, and the C here is in the major data ring, and you notice right away that you have right beside this C, it's connected, it's touching, it's called contiguous, you have an E diminished chord. And when you combine this C bass with this E diminished chord, you get a C dominant 7. And it's beautiful. Why? Well, I'll tell you why, because I designed it this way. You see here, you have a C bass, all right? And here you have a C bass. And all you did was change the chord. E diminished plus the C. And here you have E flat diminished plus the C bass. You see how that works? It's beautiful. All you did was you changed the chord. You kept the same bass, but you changed the chord, and you get the two critical chords that accordion players have to understand when they learn the accordion. These are two critical chords. Actually, these are two critical chords in music theory, all right? And then finally, the really beautiful thing is, there's another way to look at this amplified circle of fifths. There's another way to look at this, to see something that you won't see in any other circle of fifths. I designed it this way. I told you early on that when I was working out my quadrants, that I had to put the B here and not directly under the C. It's critical. Because why? Here's an example. If you have your, let's say, E diminished 7 slice on your amplified circle, okay? Right here, your E diminished 7, we talked about that. Here's your counter major ring, minor ring, and your diminished data ring. So you see what you have here is an E bass with the G diminished chord, and you get your E diminished 7 chord, okay? Your E bass with your G diminished chord. Well, all you have to do in your mind when you look at this circle is all you have to do is lower this bass tone 1/2 step, all right? And in your mind, look at this. You shifted everything over, but you lowered this 1/2 step. It's now E flat. And when you do that on your circle, you can quickly and clearly, immediately see that you have an E flat dominant 7. You went from E diminished 7 to E flat dominant 7, 2 of the basic chords in music theory that are critical. And all you did was, unlike the other thing I just showed you, you kept the same chord, but you changed the bass. You changed the bass tone. Here, you kept the same bass, and you changed the chord tones. Here, you kept the same chord, but just slightly changed the bass tone. You can look at the circle of fifths, and in your mind, change that, move it a 1/2 step lower, and you will automatically know, without looking at your Stradella chart, what are the exact tones in the E flat dominant 7. I hope that makes sense, because it's a beautiful thing, and I'm taking way too long. I have to go. So think about that. I hope it helps. Thank you for being incredibly patient, and good night.